Howdy y'all, the EJTJ here with RollToWound.com. We'll be talking the Lone Star Open and Star Wars Legion, so stick around. Alright, today we're going to be talking a little Star Wars Legion. We had a pretty big tournament up in Dallas. I have the person that ran the tournament, Ben B, here with me today. So Ben, tell the world about yourself a little bit.
Hi, I was the event organizer for the Lone Star Open Legion tournament. I run the local Houston Legion tournament, the Golden Pool. I've been running that for about as long as Legion's been out. But this was my first big event. Great partnership with Frontline Gaming, and I feel like we had a really good weekend up there in Dallas on the 24th and 25th of July.
All right, so before we really dig into the numbers of the tournament and stuff, and once again, I'm a casual Legion fan. I'm more of an AOS guy, but I love to have these Legion guys on because I do like the game. I appreciate the game. I think you guys actually had a bigger turnout than AOS at this tournament, so that just goes to say something about how big Legion is getting here in Texas. Um, so before we get started, I heard over the last week, and this is just me as an outside guy, there's some kind of big shakeup going on with Legion at some of the top levels at Atomic Mass.
Yeah, so in regards to this, I'm just a guy on the street. But from what I understand, Luke Eddy, who's been with the Legion for a long time, is now out at Atomic Mass, and this follows Alex Davies, the designer of Legion, leaving a couple months ago. So clearly, they're doing some kind of changeover. Big corporations have all kinds of incentives with how to organize themselves. Not that AMG is a big corporation; it's certainly um, lucrative. But so they have the things going on. So I don't want to read too much into that. Legion is a collaborative process, more than one set of hands involved in it, and um, you know, I don't have any real insight on that. It always sucks when someone has to leave a job they love, but maybe he's going on to bigger and better things. So I just wish the best for him, and I hope wish the best for Legion as well.
Yeah, I do too. And I know over the last couple of years, just changing hands from Fantasy Flight to there's been a lot of changes over time with it, and they continue to push out a good product. So I'm hoping that that continues, that they don't disenfranchise the fan base and cause everybody that loves the game to start searching somewhere else, like has happened with other game systems over the years. War Machine in our local area, X-Wing, it also happened to pretty big too. So I'm hoping that these shakeups are for the positive.
Yeah, it's also really hard to attribute. I mean, so I know some people, it's the soundbitey thing to do is to attribute grand sweeping things to one specific incident, and it's usually not ever that, either in macro history or just kind of the history of games. Like things interconnect in very difficult ways to understand. So I wouldn't read too much into any one particular event.
No, I agree. What caused World War II? The cause wasn't one singular thing. It's a bunch of stuff happening at the same time.
Yeah,
Or
so I
go
believe
ahead.
Legion will land. I believe Legion will land on its feet. I mean, not that it's that big of a fall. I mean, not that Luke Eddy wasn't a great contributor to Legion. It just, again, it's we shouldn't subscribe too much to one person, and hopefully, we'll go from there.
See, words of wisdom. Everybody just chill out. It'll be all right. All right, so we're going to dig right into the meat of this. I'm going to bring up our slides. And Ben, I know we've had you on once before for talking about the Porg and the local meta here in Houston, and your breakdown on and the numbers. So guys, we're going to get real meta, real nerdy, and so if you're into that, then you're in luck because Ben breaks it down pretty good, better than most that I've seen. So we're going to get into some numbers here, and I'm just going to be asking questions, and he's going to be taking it away. So we got slide one up. 56 players present on day one.
Yeah, so I don't know what the number was for other games, but we had 56 players submit lists, and all 56 players showed up on day one. And so while we're going to look at some kind of breakdown, I don't want to make this too opaque or too technical. Not that I'm super technical on this, but I just wanted to approach this from what will people play in. I know there's a lot of hubbub online about what lists get taken and what does such and such. So I thought we'd go over and just see what was put on the table and take a little look at that. We had pretty good equilibrium of factions. It was a little distorted. There were only 10 Imperial players, but otherwise speaking, we had a pretty good range of players, and Rebels, unsurprisingly, with their new buses, were the most represented faction. So, that's kind of that overview. We'll take a look at some of the specific factions in turn. Um, I've broken them down into categories, but I do want to kind of put out a big caveat that, like, list archetypes are hard to infer, and for the purposes of this, I have kind of tended to oversimplify how I categorize things. Some people could definitely go and quibble. This is not technically that archetype. I kind of took a brief look at the list and kind of did my best to put them into categories so we'd have workable charts that would be readable, not a giant mess. And of course, at the end, I have all of the lists minus the command cards, all available still on the tabletop TO event for the main event for the Lone Star Open. The command cards, I'll work on see about getting some of them added back up, but I removed them all to make them public, and it's a lot of work to put all the command cards back in.
And
Um,
speaking of this, the slideshow we have up here and a lot of these numbers, I'm going to have a link in the description to take you to a blog post so that everything that we can get or everything that Ben can give me, I'm going to put it on there so you guys will have access to these slides, to lists, to stuff like that as resources. All right,
so
go.
the first,
You
oh, go
go.
ahead.
We got. We're still on slide 156 players.
Now let's move on. Let's take a look at the rebel list first. This is kind of the simplest breakdown, so I thought we'd take a look at this first.
All right, we got.
Um, so before the event took place, I made a prediction that the two most common archetypes we'd see would be rebel buses and Maul and something else, usually B2s. And that was actually pretty correct, if I can say so myself. Rebels overwhelmingly took the new AA5 speeder truck. A lot of them, I think, with 18 players, that's 12 players fielding buses, at least one bus, and something like 18 total buses on the table. And then the really awesome thing is the second part, most played list by the Rebels, was armor, and that means you took at least two vehicles, whether they T-47s or ATRTs, and so that was something else. And the rest of the list were made up by Cassian lists. Now Cassian did make it into some of the bus lists and some of the armor lists, but a Cassian list is, I just categorized it as mainly focused around supporting Cassian. So there was, I believe, a Cassian vets up Luke list that falls in that category, and there's I believe at least one more.
Do you think that that people actually took multiple vehicles as rebels to try to counteract all the other vehicles coming from the other factions and the buses of other rebels?
Yes, I 100% believe so. I think that the double T-47 is a meta call, and it's pretty cool. I was a big detractor of the T-47 back in the, I'm going to call it the early days of Legion. I thought it was overcosted and didn't have a tactical role at its points value, and clearly that is not true anymore. They've FFG and I guess now AMG has done a good job kind of adjusting to the realities of what the unit's capable of. And I think at its new points values with some of the upgrades, I think the T-47 has a tactical role to fulfill. And I think that was borne out at the Lone Star Open.
All right, moving along to the CIS lists.
So this is the other part of that prediction I had, where we'd have Maul lists be the second most dominant archetype, and they were, I think, all but 5 players. So I think something like 8 of the 13 players for the CIS took Maul and either B2s, or I think one guy took him with an AAT, and there were a couple other combinations. And Maul is just such a great force user. I really don't see another competitive force user for the CIS faction, and that was borne out. Neither Dooku nor Grievous were taken by any CIS list at Lone Star Open. So I think this shows that if you play CIS and you want to take a force user, you want to take Maul.
And we got Cad Bane coming at 15%. Love Cad Bane as a character. What was his purpose in these lists? Was it for fun, or was there a certain tool in the toolbox?
I would have to say whenever someone takes a list at a competitive event that they have certain tours they want each unit to carry out. So I would say that almost certainly they had a role. Unfortunately, keeping track of 30 plus tables means I didn't really have a chance to see how any of the games went down tactically. I can only kind of stand by the results. But yeah, Cad Bane being the second most played archetype in the CIS, it may be a meme, but at least it's a good meme.
All right, so we've got the Imperial breakdown right here.
So the Imperials are where things start to get a little different. We don't really have a clear consensus amongst the faction players what the main archetype is going to be. And the nice thing about the Imperial list breakdown is that we had 10 players. So 1 person is 10 percentage points. So you can see that we had 3 people, each play their own list: Callus, Palpatine, and an armor list. And then we had 3 people play an Iden list, and I believe in 2 of the list, Iden was taken with another Imperial hero, and then 4 people took Vader lists. In 3 of those lists, they took more than 1 dewback. So there's a kind of a argument for a Vader dewback archetype, but with just 1 extra Vader, I just threw it in there. It's Vader is certainly a powerful Imperial commando. I think he's held up probably the best of any of the Galactic Civil War starting box units. Um, maybe bikes, but I think Vader's certainly done well, and it's kind of core staying power to see something from the very first release of Legion still being competitive. Um, Granted, there was an Op Vader in there, I believe, maybe not. I can't remember. Um, so yeah, no real consensus amongst the Imperial players as to an archetype, which is fun. A little bit of chaos is good for the universe.
Yeah, and I think when we're going back to our last discussion, talking about the Porg and talking with Andrew and stuff, just talking about where the Imperials were and how there was a lot of arguments within the Imperial players of what was the best to run if they were still good. Just so it's interesting. I think they're still working that out. It seems like.
Yeah, unfortunately for the Imperials, the LAAT wasn't the big splash that the AA5 speeder truck was. At least 2 or 3 players took the LAAT at the Lone Star Open, and I think the results were kind of underwhelming for them. So it's not the big splash unit that the Redwood bus ended up being. So with that, Imperials still have a lot of room to develop and new archetypes and such. So we'll see what happens.
A quick note on that. In your opinion, why? What's making the bus better than the lat? So.
The support slots for sure. Unorthodox Tactician is fantastic. And then Unhinged Astromat. There's so many good upgrade cards you can put on the AA5. You can make it anything you want. You can make it a command buggy. You can make it a close-up assault battering ram. You can make it a VIP delivery system. You can do whatever you want with that, and that's what makes it um, so good. With the LAT, yeah, it's a flyer. Yeah, it's the transport. Um, it's still pretty expensive for anything you want to transport. The Vader, if he's gonna go anywhere, can probably foot slog it on his own better because I mean he's relentless. He just keeps chugging. Yeah, you can get there with turn 1. I just don't think the LAA whatever has a niche that it fulfills. It doesn't give that same dynamic effect, and it doesn't have the same upgrade slots. To be fair, it just doesn't.
All right. Moving on to the Rebel lists.
I
I'm sorry, I said
Republic.
Rebels. I mean Republic.
Yeah, Republic. Heal. So I one of the first things that came out of day one pretty clearly was that Republic did not have a great day vis-a-vis the top 8, at being the only faction that missed out. But I will point out that with only 3 games of Swiss before the cut, we did have 2 Republic players make top 16. So, I mean, the Republic faction wasn't completely swept under the rug. That being said, um, this represents definitely the most chaotic um, of the 4 factions. The 2 labeled Jedi and Rex clones hide a pretty wide deviation in list formats. In terms of the Jedi, there's lists that took um, Obi-Wan and Anakin and Padme and R2D2 for a full kind of hero bomb. With the Rex clones, there's all kinds of Rex and Saber tanks, Rex and ATRTs. So there's a lot of stuff going on there. We didn't see. We saw one kind of true Rex star in the Lone Star Open, and that I think that finished in the top 16. But we didn't really see kind of clones come in and smash it in a big way, and we didn't see one dominant idea for what the clone should be doing.
All right, yeah, it's a pretty big mix, and I know some of the Rex clone stuff like Casterly had been running. I got to saw that at the Porg, and it looked almost undefeatable at times. And then I was talking, to some of the guys at the LSO, and it seemed that it wasn't undefeatable in that meta. I guess is that any truth to that statement?
Yeah, well, the thing is with clones, they're vulnerable to a certain critical mass of damage because they're so. One of the things we look at the very end is the kind of average activations, and clone lists tend to be slightly smaller than their opponents outside of faction, and so um, a lot of their activations can be pretty fragile. R2D2, while is sneaky, is basically only 4 wounds. Strike teams for all of their surge tokens and red dice are still just a couple of wounds. Um, so if you can deliver a sharp hit and break their coherence and destroy enough units and force them out of position, uh, they're in trouble. And right now, with Maul B2s and Rebel buses, that's going to be a problem. They come and hit you really hard. Things that are designed to crack armor um, or deliver a lightsaber wielding hero to right your face are pretty much direct counters to the kind of defensive phalanx type clone operations that Republic lists tend to trend to under the Rex archetype. And that goes true for like Padme Dodge clones that Daniel was running. Um, and I don't think Anakin's very good. I know that there's certain people in the local meta who are going to scream at me over that statement, but Anakin's not very good. He's an underwhelming Force user. In a faction that has better Force users, Obi-Wan Kenobi is really quite good. Anakin does not really bring anything to the table that Obi-Wan uh, can't either do himself or find someone else in the list to do equally well. And I think that his flaw card is one of the more difficult to play around. Flaw cards are a new mechanic for a lot of people. Lando saw some play, but not a huge amount. Callus saw the most play. Um, and Callus's command card is pretty easy to understand and play around. I think Anakin has got kind of a lot of things, and that's one of them that goes into uh, making him a, a difficult Force user to use and one who's, in my opinion, just not very good.
Good stuff. All right, moving down. So we're looking at slide 6, and we're looking at the activations.
Yeah, so this is both the bids and activation means for the factions. So, in
So
terms,
before we go further on this, because I'm a noob and I know what the bids are and I know what the activation are, but we're talking about means. What do you mean here? Break this down for a noob. What are we talking about right now?
well, this it's just so I'm just using math language as my teacher showing. It's just the average. So it's of all the players in the faction, what was their average bid? So the mean is just the average. So I go and I just average the players' activations and means and bids to get a mean, which is just the average. So it's an approximate value for the group. And if there's some people who means can be distorted, but for this all purposes, looking at the aggregate data, I like averages. One data point can be misleading. Averages kind of show you where things are.
All right.
And so I've broken them down in kind of a paired data set. So we have, you can see the Imperial mean bid was 7, Rebels were 8, Republic was 6, and Separatists was 16. That's twice as much as the next highest. We'll come back to that in a second. And then for the activations, all of the activations are pretty close in range, with the Imperials actually having the highest mean activation, which is another fun point I want to talk about. But Rebels and Separatists both at 10.1, with the Republic being 8.9, the substantially lowest activation count. And so to kind of address some of those points, or do you have any questions about that before I go into kind of a breakdown?
No, let's go. Let's break it down. I want to know.
Well, I want to work from the top of the list and go down. I think with the talking about the Imperial faction, I think that having the highest mean acts is absolutely fascinating, because one of the things I've talked about in the local meta is that Imperials have a hard time getting up to getting up to those higher activation numbers. Usually get stuck at 8 or 9 activations when some people are trying to try out some list ideas. And this shows that if you get creative, you can definitely get that activation count up there. Having the highest average count at an event like this, especially where you don't have a lot of players, is pretty exciting. So I just think that's fun. And the Imperials took it all. And so it shows that there's a lot of naysayers for the Imperial faction out there, but I think it's a question of finding the right balance. It's not a question of substance. It's a question of how you use what you got. I'm not sure that there's something that you need to take a wrench or a span or two and wear that. I think some experimentation would take us interesting places um, for that. Uh, for the Rebels, it doesn't surprise me. 10 bids is where they've been for a while, and at 8 activations, I think, is normal for a non-CIS faction. We'll talk about
10,
that in a second.
wait, 8 bids, 10 activations.
8, yeah, sorry, did I screw that up? My bad. Yeah, 8 bid, 10 activations is about normal. And we'll talk a little bit more about the mean bids in a minute. The Republic, I just want to take a minute to go back to the list building point I had earlier, is that critical mass is if you only have 8.9 activations and you lose one, you're in a big hole. And there were some Republic lists that took 7 activations, and a lot of their activations were not very robust. And I kind of understand what some of the list design was trying to do, but unfortunately for the players in question, it didn't seem to work out very well. So I think that's it's not a problem with the faction. It's some experimentation that didn't pan out. And I'd certainly think it's a unique challenge that Republic faction players need to be aware of when constructing their lists.
And I think that that's across the board in a lot of games, even Age of Sigmar too. When you have a low unit count, and if you're taking low unit count, those units not only they've got to make their points up, they have to kill more than their points, and they have to survive. That's the biggest thing. And when you see with an elite army, they have to survive. And currently, right now, it's Age of Sigmar example, it's almost Hero Hammer again, where some of the god monsters they can survive. That mid range though, it can be issues because if you're taking low units, like I said, one goes away, it's hard. It's hard to dig back out of that hole.
Well, I certainly would agree with that. I also want to say that in Legion, it's you. Not only does the unit have to stay on the table, it has to stay on the table and complete objectives. And there was more than a few games that were decided by people playing either the kill models or protect models, but not playing to the objectives. And that's one of the things I remind all Legion players, whether you're casual or competitive, is that Legion is an objective-based game. And so it's cool if you only lost one model, but if you stayed in the corner and never left your deployment zone, then you didn't win the game. It's the same thing as if you go and you kill every model on the enemy table, side except one. If you don't table them, then you haven't won the game either. And it's pretty hard to table people in Legion, in my experience.
All right.
So, so the last one here is the Separatist one. 16 mean bid, and we had 2 players take bids that were in excess of 21 points with a mean activation of 10. Um, I think this kind of demonstrates the efficiency of CIS list building in that they can get that kind of mid-level activation count and still have the space for the bid. I think that's kind of what separates Separatist list building from any other faction list building right now, is because they have the low base cost for the core units, and they are very economical in terms of upgrades, it's not a big challenge for them to have really steep bids. And I think we see it pretty obviously here. All of the other three factions, um, and we did have some deep bids. We had some Republic lists with 15 or 16 point bids, and we had some deep Imperial and Rebel bids as well. But the Separatists by far had the deepest bids, and it just I think it's a artifice of how they can manipulate the upgrades on their units and how they have such efficiently designed and priced core units. And I mean, Maul B2s, you're not really taking a whole lot of other flavor with that. It's usually your Force User, your T series, which is a great one of the. That's an amazing unit, and your B1 and B2 battle droids, and those are very, very efficient models across the board.
So I guess my question is, does that higher bid, do people want that higher bid because it works directly into the separatist play style, and it's like, hey, I want to have that option, or is it just because they're running out of things to get, or the way they want to build it? What do you think?
I think it definitely plays into the playstyle of Maul. I mean, it's true for other archetypes too. It was true for the deep bid for the double AAT list. We saw net decked a while ago, but it's also true for the Maul B2, and it's also true for other archetypes. But this kind of goes back to what I said about bids, kind of in general. Is if you want to build an all comers list, that's fine. That's a perfectly valid way of approaching things. Spend all of your points. Anything you have left over is an extra for your bid, but try and fill your points. If you have a specific mission you want to try and do, and a lot of these lists have specific missions they want to try and do, whether it be bombing run or hostage exchange, or payload or one of these other new missions that can be a little bit difficult for other players sometimes to wrap their head around what they need to do mechanics wise. Um, you can put someone off their balance on turn zero, and that's one of the reasons it's a big advantage. Overall, having the bid and being blue player is a huge advantage. It's um, a big commitment, and right now we've seen that the separatists can commit to getting that advantage much uh, more consistently than the other factions can.
All right. So you said you wanted to touch on something a little bit more. Was there anything else you want to talk about on these the bids and the activations?
I'm not really sure. I think I came back to the separatists on that. I think I mean I have some kind of meandering thoughts on where we see bids go. I tend to think I'm kind of surprised. I mean, averages kind of do this; they round it out. But I'm surprised that we ended up um, with the mean bids for the Imperials, Rebels, and Republic as high as we did. I thought that given that people would know CIS's predilection to bid deep, people would basically have no bid and concede and try and build around that. But I don't. I mean, some players may have done that, and maybe I'm reading too much into it. But I think talking about the bid in turn zero is a very interesting part of Legion.
All right. So last slide is just the link to the tabletop TO events, and it has the winners and losers. And you guys, I'll have a link to that in the description. Did what any other things you want to touch on or cover?
No, all of the lists are there minus the command card and the battle card, so I know that's interesting information to a lot of people, and I'm sorry it's not there, but I took it out on the second day of the event so people could see each other's lists. I thought that was a fair way to do things. And I just don't really have the time to sit down and put back 56 command and battle decks into lists on tabletop TO. So maybe when I get the data aggregated, I'll push that out so people can see the full list. But right now, that's not something that's a priority for me. I'm sorry. Um, but I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble from my poorly lit home office slash gaming room. And thanks for listening to me. And I hope if you came to Lone Star Open, hope you had fun and hope to see you next year.
Yeah, if you guys are in the Houston area, especially, and you play Star Wars Legion, look up the Golden Porg and check out Ben. Super friendly. It's a pretty good community down here. Everybody is super helpful. You can play everything from, hey, I just want to have fun and go throw dice, all the way up to top tier competitive. The community is great for all of it. I love having Ben on. He runs really good tournaments. He's a super fair TO in my opinion, and I like to get this Star Wars content out here because we do have a very good growing community and a lot of guys that are into it. And so I appreciate Ben taking the time to come and ramble with me and chill out. So thanks very much, sir.
Thank you, Jason. You have a great evening, sir.
All right. Thanks for watching, and y'all be good.